Hi, welcome to everyone to this event. My name is Isabel Stevens. I'm the managing editor of Sight and Sound. I'll talk a little bit more about what I do shortly. We hope this event will give you a little bit of a glimpse behind the scenes at the magazine. I'm going to give you a quick tour to start with of the magazine and give you a bit of insight into how it's put together. So not only hopefully will you come away from this with a sense of like how to write a review, but maybe a glimpse behind the scenes about how reviews are edited and also commissioned in the first place. After that we'll go on to the sort of nuts and bolts of what makes a good film review. We're obviously also interested to hear your thoughts afterwards about what makes a good review, what reviews you like, your thoughts on the practice of film reviewing, and we're also open to any questions afterwards that you may have. But first of all, a bit of information about the magazine. Sight and Sound, I don't know how many of you are aware of its history, but it was first published in 1932. And it was published as a quarterly, and in our first issue, the first review that we ran in the magazine was by C.A. Lejeune, who also went on to write reviews for The Guardian, and this was the first review in the magazine. West Front, 1918, The Real War, seen through German eyes, dialogue in German, superb playing and remorseless direction by G.W. Pabst, not for children. That was it. So that was Sight and Sound in 1932. It was largely it largely went on to be a quarterly that was sort of feature-based. And in 1934, we introduced a sort of sister publication called Monthly Film Bulletin. So that was monthly, and that main purpose of that publication was reviews. In 1991, Sight and Sound and Monthly Film Bulletin merged, and Sight and Sound became monthly. In 2021, we relaunched the magazine with the current design here. And just to show you sort of the variety of writing that's in the magazine before we get down into the review section, this is sort of a little tour. We have opening scenes, which is what's known in the sort of industry as the front section, which is news, slightly more current affairs, short form sort of pieces, little interviews, snippets of information, but also sort of this piece here, Once Upon a Time in Tillywood, a piece about sort of AI and Hollywood. So it's the last section that goes to press. It's got something last minute in. It's where we publish obituaries. That's the sort of thing that goes on there. Mean Sheets is our regular monthly column, which shows off film posters. That's a particularly nice one that I liked recently. And we have the talkies section, which is where we run various different opinion columns and that have lovely illustrations like that one there. And twice a year we publish the Black Film Bulletin, which we sort of resurrected when we relaunched the magazine in 2021, which is a special space where we work with 3 black editors, and that's sort of their space to explore latest developments in black film, but also sort of historical pieces as well. And that's not to say that we limit sort of exploration of black cinema just to those pages, but just that's an extra space that we've made for that in the magazine. Just going on to highlight a few features. So the feature section is obviously where we have the cover feature, sort of Paul Thomas Anderson topping our end of year poll would be a good example recently, but also just wanted to share another of highlights, sort of highlight of last year, for me anyway, was working on the oral history we did for In the Mood for Love, which came together right at the last minute, and but was something we'd never done before, and spoke to lots of the key people involved in the film, including Maggie Cheung and Wong Kar-wai himself, which Sam spoke to the night before we went to press. So we also sort of published film maker interviews, and I suppose the features section sort of stands apart from the review section, but when we publish essays or say reports from film festivals, there is a bit of an overlap there, with the type of writing that you would expect from a film review. So that's kind of a sort of snapshot of the part of the magazine that I work most closely on. Just wanted to pass over to Katie McCabe, who's our reviews editor.
Yes, so I'm the reviews editor, and there are a few different parts of my role, but I want to talk you through the print section, which you'll see here. Have we many Sight and Sound readers in the audience? Does this look familiar? Yeah, great. So the print section changed quite a lot. I've been at Sight and Sound for 4.5 years, and when I joined, it had just undergone a big redesign. So when we print this section, there are 20 theatrical releases that go in this section, and there was once upon a time where we reviewed every theatrical release, but I think last year there was something like 1,300 releases, which is, unfortunately, it just means that, with the changes with streaming and people, films having shorter theatrical windows, not everything can be covered in the magazine, but I'll talk about our online coverage in a moment. So we have 20 reviews we review in section. We also have Q&As with directors against different reviews, and that is a kind of collaboration with features in a way, because if there's something we can't cover in features, often there might be like a debut filmmaker that we think that their film is really special and we want to highlight it, so I'll do a Q&A with them myself, and then that will migrate online eventually on the film's release. And the process of getting each film in the section is it can be a real horrible process of elimination sometimes, because you're like, if I could, I would highlight everything that was coming out. But sometimes, I prioritize international releases, indie releases, things that have been at Cannes, Berlin that we have seen and think are worth spotlighting, major theatrical releases. And I think within the print section there can be a bit of a misconception that we don't do major blockbusters, but actually what that is more to do with is that we don't get access to the screenings of those major blockbusters until right before their release, which we obviously go to print weeks and weeks and weeks before that. So it can be kind of determined by what we have access to. And I think what we do differently at Sight and Sound is we have an extremely rigorous editing process for the magazine. I mean, just to give you a picture, I won't labor on it too much, but the writer will file to me, I'll kind of restructure it, go back and forth with them with edits, and then it goes on to our sub-editor, Robert Hanks, who is a really talented writer as well as being a sub-editor. If you've never seen his article on Penda's Fen in London Review of Books, I highly recommend seeking it out. And then it goes to our production editor, who at the moment is Nick Bradshaw. And then it goes to our editor, who's Mike Williams, who signs it off. So there's like many layers, many arguments, many disagreements about different. And I think what's different about our editing process, I think, is a huge collaboration with the reviewer. And there's many I never take something and rewrite it. It's always, if there's a turn of phrase that I'm changing, if there's a restructuring happening, it's a collaborative process that happens with them. But I think I'll talk a little bit about how it migrates to online if we change over to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there are a few different parts to my job. There's the print section in Sight and Sound, but then online there is festival coverage. So we do Berlin, Cannes, Venice. We do coverage out of Rotterdam. Some of those reviews will end up in print. We also do, and so the reviews that have been in print, they will go online for their week of release. And so a big part of my job is putting those reviews online. And I think even that process, I think, is quite different for Sight and Sound, because something like Barbie, we actually published that, I think, 4 days after that film came out, which is very different, because I think the impulse in a lot of online editorial is like, you want to be the first. And we want to be the most analytical, we want to have the best take on something, we want to make sure everything is accurate and well argued. And so that Barbie review actually, it went through the magazine editing process and then it went online. And that was Beatrice Loaiza, who is a really beautiful piece of writing and very well argued at a time when there was kind of across the board pretty much positive reviews of Barbie. And I think that the fact that we give something time before it goes online, I think makes a huge difference. And then another thing we do is we go into our archive, which, as Isabel pointed out, goes back many decades. And so when there is a 4K restoration or there is a 50-year re-release for their anniversary, or in this case, for The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, which is a really beautiful review from 1975, That was in, was it? I can't remember if it was Multi Film Bulletin. No, it was Sight and Sound. And that was for the Herzog season at the South Bank. So I took that from our archive and republished it. And then when something is at a festival, I mean, in an ideal world, we would have a first look review from a festival, and then it would go have a second look for the magazine. But with budget constraints and time constraints, sometimes that review will migrate straight into the magazine. And I'll always try and get the strongest writer on that film. But in this case with Megalopolis, we had a great second look review because it was, you know, an incredibly newsworthy film. And Jessica Kiang reviewed it at Cannes, and it was a really beautiful piece that decoded quite a difficult film to make sense of. And she unpicked the imagery in a really beautiful way, and it was almost like reportage and review mixed together. And then that ran in the magazine, actually.
As part of our...
As part of Cannes coverage. And then I did a second look review with Jonathan Rosenbaum. And although they both kind of had a similar mixed take in that they thought it was a kind of folly of a film with many different ideas kind of that didn't quite come off, Jonathan Rosenbaum's, his writing of it was incredibly different, and he compared it to a few films in Francis Ford Coppola's back catalogue that Jessica hadn't picked up on. So it's this ongoing conversation. But festival coverage is extremely important to what we do. And that's its own workload. But I'll hand you over to Tom, who looks after our home hits and DVD
slide.
section.
So I'm Thomas Liu. I'm the editorial assistant at Sight and Sound, and I look after the home entertainment pages. So that's the DVD reviews or Blu-ray reviews or 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray reviews. As well as a few other pages around there, and then also the wider screen section. So the majority of what I commission and edit is reviews. Looking at wider screen, you can see there, so we've got both a review of an art exhibition, then also a sort of festival report. Both combine sort of review writing in different ways. I really enjoy commissioning sort of people going to events and writing about them in a sort of review. It's sort of similar to what you were saying about the reviews of Megalopolis from Cannes, which was like reportage. It's a really interesting skill to be able to both review something as a piece of art and also write about the experience of going to and interacting with it. We should also say, Katie, that your book pages are here. So Katie commissions, and it's the book reviews. And then we've also got a couple of examples of home entertainment reviews. My working process for getting a review from sort of an initial plan to being on the page is very similar to Katie's. It goes through the same sort of process of editing and sub-editing and proofing. So it's normally seen by, excluding the writer, I suppose, like 4 people from Sight and Sound before it's out into the world. Similarly to cinema releases, there are just so many home entertainment releases, which is, I think, a great thing, that it's firstly a process of elimination of what do I think the readers are going to be interested in, which is either sort of the most noteworthy releases. Often it's something that's maybe a bit unusual. In our next issue, we'll have a review of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which Criterion released a new restoration of, which is sort of a fairly unusual, despite it being an auteurist film by Tim Burton, it's a fairly unusual film for Criterion to be releasing, so I wanted to spotlight that there. So over those pages, we have space for 10 reviews, 1 lead review, which, as you can see in the top left, spans a whole spread, and it's about 1,000 words. We have 2 reviews of about 500 words, which are these larger columns here, and then the rest are all about 350. So concision is a really important thing for writing for these pages. You have the benefit with a lot of films that it will be something that's more familiar for a reader. There's a review up there of A Hard Day's Night, which I've put on the handouts, which is a lovely review by Kim Newman, and he uses to his benefit the fact that you will have some familiarity with the film, even if you've not seen it. You'll know what it is, you'll know who the Beatles are and things like that, and that can really help. Equally, we'll have films that ideally for the people releasing it no one has seen, and that's sort of, it's a real coup for them that they've discovered this hidden gem and they're sharing it with the world. And so that's a whole other sort of kettle of fish for the reviewer, is to how to condense all this information about something that you might not have heard of at all while also talking about the film. And then in addition to those pages, we have a great a column that I really enjoy editing, commissioning, called Lost and Found, which is almost the opposite of a DVD review. It's something that you can't find on any home entertainment, which, similar to what I was saying about hidden gem films, you have to really do a lot of work in making sure you really explain the film, because, which I guess was, for a lot of readers going back through the decades where films were a lot harder to access, a lot of people's interaction with a film would only be through the written word, be it through a magazine or through a book in a library or something like that. So I see it as a sort of an ancestor of that kind of writing. And again, those tend to be moving away from reviews to something a bit more personal, how that person experienced the film. You know, if you can't see it on a DVD, how are you able to discover it? Was it at a festival? Was there a special screening? Was it that you found it on a really terrible copy on YouTube? And that's sort of interesting in its own right sometimes. Yeah, and I think I'll go in more detail about what I think makes a good review. Later on we'll have to talk, but Sam, I was going to pass over to you. You were going to talk about the more actual useful information maybe.
So my name's Sam, I'm the digital features editor. So I deal mainly with features, but I've also been reviewing for Sight and Sound for about 20 years. And I thought it'd be useful just to talk about the sort of nuts and bolts of how you see the films in the first place, how you have that advanced opportunity to see the film, which obviously, you know, to be in any hope of writing a review for a magazine or a newspaper, you need to see it like way before it comes out. So how do you go about that? The answer is obviously through press screenings, which are come in various different sort of shapes and sizes. The very first opportunity to see a film is generally at an international festival where the world premiere is, which obviously lots of journalists will get a chance to go to Cannes or Berlin or Venice. But after the festival, or if a film is not a kind of festival film, then the publicist or the distributor will lay on screenings in London for journalists and critics. And these can be sometimes way in advance, which are called long lead screenings, which are often for magazines to assess the film and find out whether they want to cover them in a big way or not. They can be a few weeks in advance, or they have also week of release screenings, and these are often targeted at the weekly journalists. So when you go to those, that's when you often see, you know, the Peter Bradshaws of the world and the Wendy Ides and Mark Kermode when he was on that beat. That's people who are kind of covering weekly reviews, sometimes 5 of them a week. They can also be in many different venues, some very glamorous, some not so glamorous. There's a kind of workhorse venue in Soho called Soho Screening Rooms, or previously known as Mr. Young's, which you go and see some of the more sort of, you know, the smaller films. But then the big distributors or big companies like Warner Brothers, Netflix, Apple will all have their own offices that sometimes the screenings are there. But then also a lot of the hotels in Soho and Fitzrovia have their own screening rooms because they make a tidy buck by loaning them out to distributors to host press screenings there. But then how do you get into these things in the first place? Often, obviously, if you are commissioned to write a review, then your editor can do that legwork for you because they'll have a relationship with the PR or the distributor, and they can get your name on the list. But if you're a freelance journalist and you're trying to, you know, see the film to create an opportunity for yourself, then it's a case of reaching out to the distributor or the publicist working on behalf of the distributor, and often they will require you to show that you some coverage is going to end up out of it, that you're not just kind of chancing it and you just want to see the film. And some of these things are policed more stringently than others. Like independent distributors are often just quite happy for the interest in their film and the promise of some small coverage and the support of a small kind of, you know, world cinema type film. You're more likely to get an opportunity to see that. Whereas if it's a a Disney film or a Warner Brothers film, they're going to want to know exactly what you're going to do with it. On the other hand, in recent years, critics have had to fight for places in the screenings of the big ones against influencers and sort of social media people who are often not going to write about the film for more than a few few characters on social media, and yet they're privileged more than an actual film critic often. Is becoming an increasing issue. So what then, when you actually get into the screenings, quite often the myth that, or the glory days of the kind of 1980s and 90s, which is before all of our time, but there was a time when I think you could go and you could pretty much guarantee having your lunch there. There'd be sort of sandwiches laid on and all this sort of thing, wine. I mean, I think the first press screening I ever went to was for Sideways, the Alexander Payne film in 2004, and it was at the Soho Hotel, and they laid on Pinot Noir and all that kind of thing, as you'd expect for the film. And I thought, wow, this is I've arrived here. This is what it's going to be like. Unfortunately, it's some stewed black coffee, I think, is more often what it's like. But it completely depends. But you can't bank on it anymore. It takes you by surprise. So once you're in there in the dark, obviously a very important thing if you're writing a review is to take lots of notes, unless you've got some crazy memory for things. But it's in the dark. Surprisingly, those sort of torch-based pens are a bit of a myth, I think. I've never really seen them about. People, I think if you sit within the glare of the screen, then maybe you've got a chance of seeing what you're writing. If you've got terrible handwriting like I have, then just take your chance in the dark and scrawl some things, and then look at it on the journey home and realise it's totally illegible. And then when you get out of the screening, often like within a few hours or maybe the next day, the publicity person will be quite keen to hear your reaction to the film. They'll email you and say, so what did you think? And that's particularly for earlier screenings, that's about them gauging how the film is landing with critics, what kind of press they can expect to get. If you feel very negatively about the film, then it can be a bit awkward feeding back, but there's kind of ways of, wrapping the negativity within a nice positive shell, or just.
I always say that one's not for me. I'm afraid that's my line I go to.
I steal that from Tom because I never know what to say.
Yeah, but then if you are very positive, they'll say, "Oh, would you give us a quote for the poster or the marketing materials?" And then that can be quite awkward as well, because I think at Sight and Sound there's a policy that the quote has to come from the printed review, not just from what the critic is feeding back at that point. So then you have to say, "Oh, I can give you something, but I'm not going to write it for a couple of weeks. I have to feed it back to you then, and then make sure it's the exact phrase that's used in the printed version." And then you get the business of then potentially using your words on the poster, which I think for different people means different things. For some people it's like, oh wow, yeah, I can see my name emblazoned all over the London Underground on posters. But I tend to agree with the great American critic A.S. Hammerer on this, who apparently was so appalled when he first saw his name on a poster with a quote that he made it he basically changed the way he wrote reviews and made it so that no review he ever wrote was possibly quotable from again. That there were no journalistic superlatives. There were no expressions of approbation, or he would I think that's happened to me actually back about 20 years ago. There was a very small British film that I gave a very negative review to, and then just the single word epic was used on posters across town, which I didn't think epic was a term of phrase. Just epic. It wasn't even with an exclamation mark, which these days, like epic would be like great. But it was just to describe the kind of scope of the thing. But they used it out of context, and I was that was fine. But for A.S. Hammer, it was like this complete, like that's definitely, I'm not writing like that again. And I think if anyone who doesn't know his work should check out his style. It's kind of quite different from Sight and Sound. Doesn't really follow any of the rules of like following the plot details that would just kind of zero in on something else. His little kind of prose poems. And I think when you've read your 1000th review that uses words like kind of blistering or says like such and such gives a career best performance or one of these kind of meaningless phrases that doesn't really tell you anything about the actual performance. People like that are to be treasured. How long do you get to write a review out of a festival? Katie will tell you that she wants them pretty quickly.
But this is the thing, like sometimes it's overnight, but then if like someone like Jessica Kiang, and I'll talk about her review like Mara later, I gave her a week, and I did the same actually with Megalopolis. We gave her I think like 7 days or something like that, because if someone comes back to me and says there's a lot to say and I only need time to let that germinate, I'll give it to them. Whereas I think other publications
it's very unusual.
It's very, very, very unusual. Like, I think at the trades, like you're talking hours or like at the very least 24 hours turnaround, and people do great work, and then some people thrive on that adrenaline. But for us, if someone tells me they need the time, I give them the time, and that counts for print as well. Like I'm flexible with print deadlines if it means I know I'm going to get a better write-up out of it, and I think that is quite unique.
For all the perceived glamour of Cannes and places like that, although they stopped giving the journalists free wine this year, or so.
Someone misbehaved. I want to know who it was.
I know exactly. But you'll see immediately after screening, you'll see journalists sort of furiously like tapping away at their laptops. We've been out for drinks with a critic, like just trying to write a review on her phone while we're all getting another cocktail.
But with festivals, it is tricky because it's a newsworthy event. So it's the thing that you're going to get the biggest reaction out of is if you're one of the first. And and it's everywhere I've worked before Sight and Sound, that is always the pressure. Be the first. And it's really it's really gratifying to work somewhere that doesn't put that pressure on you and says, if it's going to mean better writing, better prose, and if it's going to be accurate, then wait a few days. But still, I do put myself under that pressure because I still, I try and get as quick as I can to But it really depends, and it depends on the writer as well. Because if I have a long-standing relationship with them and I know that they're going to give me the best possible work, then I'm happy to wait. Yeah.
I think that's part of the importance of having an archive, because we know that people look back on our reviews, and so it's not just about the moment too. Sam, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I'm just going to talk about filing the review, sending it in, at the importance of being on deadline, hitting deadlines and hitting the right word count. I think that's half the editor's job done if you can do those two things, and you'll instantly instantly a favourite. And there's a sneaky thing you can do now. It used to be kind of attachments or in the body of an email. I quite like receiving things in the body of an email because it means there's no issue of opening some attachment from some obscure file program that they've used, and there's no kind of weird styling that's crept in. But with Google Docs, you can sort of send a live version, which means the anxiety of sending a final thing is gone. You can sneakily make adjustments even after you've filed.
But also means that the writer can see when we, the editors, are in their documents. It's quite daunting for everyone involved, I think.
And you can also be sneaky and send the link, but then not actually give access, so you're still writing it.
We know all the tricks,
Yeah, and that's the thing, we all write for the magazine, so we, as editors, we're all editors, but we all have a lot of sympathy for our writers because we're all on the other side of it as well, But we didn't say I didn't say the most important thing was we don't do star ratings. So if you want to understand what the reviewer's take on the film is, you got to sit there and read it. It's not serviceable journalism that we do. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's slow journalism, because I like to think all that work publishing stuff on the website is not slow. But our priority is a mix of great analysis and great prose, and that that takes time. And so we're not interested in doing like, is it good or is it bad? And whether or not you should just pay, what is a cinema ticket these days? Depends where you go. We're not interested in the economics of like whether or not you should turn up. It's like, we want you to be able to sit with what the writer has to say and decode it with them and gain a deeper understanding. And I know a lot of our readers read the reviews after the fact, and I know that's how I approach great reviews. With places like Reverse Shot and other places that prioritise the long-form traditional review.
You're right, there's a sort of dual audience that we're going for, which is the people who haven't seen the film yet and the people that have, which I think is where things like spoilers, which is probably something that's worth talking about, comes into it. You know, some films there's an event that's very pivotal, but you can't say what it is because some people will sort of take umbrage with the fact that you've spoiled a moment in the film, with good reason a lot of the time, because you don't want to, you know, if it's something that affects how you watch the film, you don't want to know it ahead of time. But that's probably one of the hardest things I think for a critic, is working their way around a film where you can't really say what it's about.
And there are some critics who, you know, they love to give spoilers. They love to tell you everything. And I think that, like, because in our previous design, we had a long synopsis which did give everything away. I think sometimes writers will get in the habit of giving everything away. So there is a bit, that's a lot of what I do when I edit, is taking out third act twists. And some of our readers would argue I don't take out enough.
Yeah, it's definitely the subject we get the most letters about, I think, to the magazine.
Yeah. I was taught by Laura Mulvey, and it was the first thing she said to me was, don't care about spoilers. Like, if you want to see film as an art form that you're analysing, but obviously not everyone feels that way, and that's a valid opinion as well.
So I think we've done the sort of like how to get to a film, how to watch a film. Katie, maybe you can take us through what makes a good review.
I have some tips, and like this is not prescriptive at all, and some of them I'm kind of half joking, but here's my broad tips. Be very, very careful with your opening and closing lines. They should be the things that you spend the most time with, that you should agonize over them. I know when I'm writing a review, that's the thing that takes the most time. And they should be your priority. And I think if you talk to any of the writers I work with, and there was like a bingo card for what I'm going to come back with, it'll be like, I think this closing line's a bit vague. It doesn't feel like a definitive closing line. I think that's the thing I say most often. Avoid excessive summarizing of the plot, because we have a long review that's, our print section is made up of like a 740 word long review and 420 short reviews. If you're excessively summarizing a plot on a 420 word review, that's that word count gone. And it's dull for the reader, it doesn't allow you to assert your opinion, and it's a really easy trap to get in. I think sometimes when you feel like you're doing really lyrical turns of phrase, it can feel like you're giving your opinion, but what you're actually doing is just describing what happens on screen, and that's not a review, and it's not helpful to the reader. Don't follow the beats of the plot, because I think particularly with a longer review, you can feel like you need to follow the rhythm of the film, and it's like eats up word count, and you just don't need to do it. And it takes away from the analysis. Avoid puns and wordplay. I don't always stick to that, because if it's a really good pun and it's a really good wordplay, it's a different story. But what I really hate is when people put in brackets apologizing for a bad pun. Oops, sorry, or like knowingly do it. That is like my absolute like pet hate. It's like if you're gonna do it, do it. Like if you're gonna do a shit pun, like own that rubbish pun, and then I'll delete it. Avoid excessive formal language. Arguably, we have a lot of formal language in Sight and Sound, but I don't need you to say narrative 7 times in a review. Think about the craftsmanship within a film, and like with Sight, and I know all publications are different, and so it really depends on voice. But for us, it's like film is a collaborative art. Every film will have different bits of craftsmanship that stand out to you, so don't be afraid to talk about the cinematography, don't be afraid to go deep on the score. Like, it really just depends on what you're working with, but it's not just about the director, it's not just about the star. Don't talk about the film in a vacuum. Talk about, I mean, it might be a debut, but talk about the director's previous work, talk about how it relates to other films in the genre, talk about how it doesn't relate to other films in the genre, but just like think about it in a broader scope. My biggest tip is don't forget to review the film. And that is the most important thing, because if you're losing time on plot synopses and descriptions, or if you're just like so interested in a director, you end up talking about their career and then you get to it and you have like 50 words left and you haven't even mentioned the bloody film. That happens all the time. And I have to go back, I'm like, this is a great bit of writing, but you didn't talk about the film. So those are my main tips. But yeah, like a deep analysis of screen culture, and again, like that mix of analysis and great prose, which and I'm always talking about Jessica Kiang, but I really feel like she is a rare writer who has like a novelistic approach to reviews. So if you don't know her work, please seek it out. I'm going to be talking about one of her reviews later, but she has that rare ability to mix great prose and analysis, and yeah, that's what I look for.
What about you both? Is there anything else you have to add to that? Sam, you've been reviewing for a long time for us.
I really dislike what I call synopsis paragraphs, which is a bit like Katie. If you're talking about the plot that is in a way that is completely separate from analysis or critical opinion, then it's just a kind of complete shut off. Like you can see, particularly I think, in some publications you'll see a kind of an opening paragraph of the criticism, and then you'll get the synopsis paragraph, and then you'll get the summing up paragraph, and that kind of structure is just a complete turn off for me.
That's interesting because I definitely do that.
No, but that's a key thing. Like everything I will pull a writer up on, I've done it myself, and I know I do that sort of 3-couplet thing in a sentence all the time, which is like a very a very repetitive thing that you get in reviews. And I do too much plot description, and I do too much like getting lost in lyrical descriptions of things. We all do it. But it's just like, I, as an editor, with the editor hat on, I have to have the reader in mind. So don't forget to review the film.
Yeah, a lot of the reviews in my section are shorter than the ones that Katie's commissioned. Concision for me is the absolute key thing. If you've only got 350 words and you want to talk about this film, and things like the context, and especially if it's an older film, like lots of the films in my section are, you've got context that's both before and after as well sometimes. Knowing what the most important things to say are is a real skill. And I think that comes a lot from writing the review and then reading it and looking back over it and going, okay, if I hadn't seen this film, would this piece of writing tell me, if not everything about the film, then all the things that I really feel like I might need to know to understand it well, which is why I've picked the example that I've put on here, which is a review by Kim Newman, which I think is an excellent job of concision, of understanding. The readers of Sight and Sound tend to have a fairly good knowledge of cinema, and so understanding what the sort of assumed knowledge might be, how much of the plot is necessary, and how much gives a gist of the film and the sort of direction it's going in without having to go through the beats. Although, like I said, I do like doing that. Sometimes I think it's quite nice for a film, if a film has such a laborious plot, it almost makes a point in itself going through all the things you're sort of saying without saying it. Look at how many things happen in this film. Like, you know what I mean? I completely agree with what you're saying about the sort of
Another thing along similar lines I really dislike is a very kind of earnest, quite literary examination of the characters' motivations, and you sort of really get into like this kind of earnest analysis of like what they're up to at any one point, and with no sense of what the film is like visually or what the director is doing, what the cameraman is doing, just as if it's like a novel you're reading about rather than a film, an oral and visual experience.
So I think it's quite telling that, I think, is it 2 of the pieces that we've got on the handout of David Lynch films? Because, in theory they're very hard films to review because they're so visual and oral and and it's about the performance, which are things that lots of people really do struggle to write about.
Yeah. Do you want to go for a raise ahead, because that's actually first on the handout, which
so sadly this is a review we pulled from the archive on the day of David Lynch's death, and the reason we pulled it is just like it's a first response to Eraserhead, which is a difficult film to interpret on a first viewing. And I just think, I go into the archive a lot to pull reviews. Quite often I find pans, so it's a real joy when you go in to find a review of a classic and it's an actual, somebody's interpreted it as we all interpret it. Like we know it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking. And basically the reviewer just starts at saying like no synopsis can convey the nightmare of David Lynch's extraordinary black and white horror. The film is in itself an absurd, surreal treat of repulsive beauty and grisly comedy. And it's like, that's something I would put in the review if I was to do it today. It's like, there's still no great way of decoding that film. And it's just, it's lovely to go back and see the initial response.
What's interesting there is I think that first sentence, no synopsis could adequately convey. I think we would maybe be a bit reticent to publish that now because it seems a bit over-egging it a bit. And like you said about A.S. Hammer and not wanting to be on a poster, I think we quite often will try and temper down a bit of a writer's writing if they say, this is the best film of the year by far.
Or this is the first film ever to look at blah, blah.
There was a quote about Hamnet which sort of made the rounds on social media, which was something like, it's not just the best film of the year, it's the best film I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
And lots of people were making fun of the writer for that, but I think that's a real failure on the editor's part to not say, I think you might need to think about this a bit, because that's, even if it's not true, it's not going to be representative of how everyone is going to see the film. But yeah, it's easy to look back and think, well, that's spot on about Eraserhead, but maybe if someone was saying that about a debut film now, we might go, think about that a bit.
There's also lots of instances where everything's subjective, but we didn't maybe get it right in our reviews, right?
Lots of times.
I'm
trying to think of a good one. But basically, every William Friedkin film got a negative review in our archive, and it's like when he died, I was like, some of them, you must have liked one of them, but like, no. I think the closest I got was The Sorcerer. That was like a vaguely positive review, but it's kind of amazing when you look back.
But then, you see, I guess, where a critic like Mark Commode came in, and I suppose, Friedkin was like really his sort of, he really championed him.
Yeah. The Exorcist got a negative review as well. I think it was like a very short notice though. So it was, if it had been like a long in-depth kind of pan, it would have been kind of interesting to republish, not on the day of his death, but like.
Not for children.
Not for children. Yeah, but I often think of the role of the editor as like, there's an element of de-escalation involved, like particularly with festival reviews, because like people come out and it's like you haven't, and it's a good thing that you haven't heard anybody else's reactions and you haven't absorbed all of the discourse around it. But sometimes people leave a festival review and they're either like spitting with rage or just like overcome with like joy to have seen this film, and that sometimes my role is to be like, hold it back, just calm down. Like when someone meets someone in a bar and you're like, you're not in love with them, just take it down a notch. Or like, or if, like sometimes people, like I'm not against pans at all, but there are times where you're just like, it's, stop kicking it, it's already dead. Like just calm down a bit and like, let's just take it back and like restructure this thought, because sometimes the initial feeling is not what you actually want out in the world. And like more often than not, writers will come back and be like, okay, yeah, fair enough. I didn't actually mean that. It's just like that initial feeling can be very overwhelming sometimes.
We've all experienced that feeling of watching a film twice and having a completely different reaction to it the second time. And I think that's a real quality in good writers, is almost being able to have that second viewing on the first one and not going all guns blazing in that major emotional reaction.
Which brings me on nicely to my choice, which is Jonathan Rosenbaum, who worked on the staff of the magazine back in the 70s and travelled to the Edinburgh Film Festival, where he watched Chantal Akerman's Jeanne Dielman for the first time. And those who don't know, Jeanne Dielman is officially the greatest film of all time. I think this is actually more of an excerpt from his review. It's a really interesting instance for me. When I found it in the archive, I was like really amazed because it's a very, very long review from a festival, but also you really get a sense of him grappling with a film that he's never really experienced something like that before, and you get that experience throughout the review, and he almost at first dismisses it and sort of says like, what is this film? I didn't get on with it, but gradually, and he also admits he went out for a cigarette break in the middle of it. And
it's all the things you would definitely say not to do in a review. Stop paying attention.
You'll be killed on social media now for saying that. And I guess that was the equivalent of getting your phone out or something then. But then sort of kind of a way through the review, he sort of takes a step back and goes, actually, but I can't get this film out of my head. And he starts to tease out and it's almost like a conversation with himself inside his head. It's really fascinating.
Another thing it does is it spoils the ending immediately, which we definitely
which you wouldn't do from a festival now. So that was really interesting, and we included that in our Chantal Akerman publication that came out this time last year. But yeah, for me, that's a really, it's amazing how much insight he had into that film from one viewing at a festival. Love it. Yeah. And also, actually, I should recommend, it's a completely different take on the film, but there's a sort of political writer called David Runciman who runs a podcast, and he has got a great podcast all about political films. But there's one episode where he dedicates to Jeanne Dillman, and it's a really interesting instance of somebody just reviewing a film and not referencing anything about the filmmaker particularly. And actually I found it really refreshing, and it was something that I thought, oh, you know, that's something that I think is great about Sight and Sound, is that you get a lot of, you know, comparisons, and this is where this film sits in this, you know, director's larger body of work. But sometimes it's quite interesting to read something that's just like, this is the film, and this is my take on it. And, you know, he can sort of talks about inflation in the 70s in relation to Jeanne Dillman. It goes into lots of different places, but yeah, anyway, that's that. Who's next? Sam.
So I've chosen another kind of slightly rule-breaking review, because I think if you were to pitch Katie a review in which the first paragraph of a not insubstantial 200 words or something doesn't even mention the film and is a sort of off the deep end sort of attempt to grapple with the idea of what pure cinema is, she probably would have put a lot of red pen for it. I don't know, maybe not.
Maybe not. Not if it was this.
After what happens afterwards, maybe not, because what happens afterwards is this is Michael Atkinson's review of Inland Empire from 2007, which I think possibly has a kind of love it or hate it quality, a bit like Inland Empire itself, because it's full of what, if you know Atkinson's work is full of kind of words he's invented, and just very just, I mean, you have to read it for yourself, but here's a little taster. He says, "Here is an undiluted madcap splooge of purest grade A cinema from our greatest and most uncompromising sui generist." I think that's an invented word, the generist part. I don't think you can say that. 3 aggressively nutsy hours long, and so furiously self-involved, so hermetically sealed yet explosive and fascinating, so purely a movie and nothing else, that roping it into any category of any other movies seems a dubious labour. Evoking it in a mere review is in fact a doomed enterprise. But I think he does a pretty good job. I'll leave you to read for yourself, but it's uses phrase like trapped in its own bell jar, and it's a great piece of writing. And I think when I read it when it came out, and it really coloured my understanding and reading of the film. In fact, to the extent that I was very surprised to kind of learn quite recently that Inland Empire did not land in other places. It's actually got pretty much panned in places like Screen Daily and BBC Online and Uncut Magazine. I was finding all these sort of 2- and 3-star reviews. So to read Atkinson, you'd really think it was like one of the great films of the decade, as in some cases it's been voted. And that's a great piece. Give it a read.
And I was just thinking, as you said that, it would be really interesting to go back into our archives on our server to see what the original copy that he sent in was, and how many words the sub-editor and the editor were like, no, you're not having that.
It's a good example of meeting a film where it lays as well. I think it works because it's Inland Empire that he's reviewing. If it was, I don't know, Saving Private Ryan, and you're making up words in the review, you think, okay, come on, it's not that serious. Which I think the review that you're going to talk about does as well, matches.
Like Mara?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really tempted to read out the first paragraph. I don't want to do like a recital, but it's just because this is a really good example of like Jessica saw this at a festival, and actually it's interesting because it's a good sort of lesson for, like, because she had said to me, I'm not sure I'm the best person to review this film because I didn't really get on with Alicia Rohrwacher's last film, which was Happiest Lazaro before this. And I was like, okay, let's just see it, and let's just see. And then she was just completely entranced. So you just don't know. And I get reviewers all the time saying like, oh, I don't really get on with their films, and like, I just don't think I'm the best person. It's like, you don't know what's coming next. So I'm going to read this out just because it really struck me as a great first paragraph, and I'll explain why in a minute. Weeds grow through the cracks in every pavement of Alicia Rohrwacher's wayward, wondrous La Chimera. They twine through the flagstones outside the crumbling Tuscan manor where Flora awaits the return of her daughter, who disappeared imperiously ignoring the visiting chatter of 4 others who did not. They bunched between the sleepers of the railway tracks on the abandoned Riparbella station house, tripping up the little kids who play on them. Just like the ragged life that bursts and floods the frames of Helen Luvart's wild, windswept photography, the weeds of La Chimera won't be tamed, reaching up into the sunlight from the cool, dark underground, which is also, of course, where the dead live. And it's that where the dead live that I just love, because to me, and this is what to me makes like, and it's very hard to do, what makes a great closing parrot is when it feels like a really great cinema cut. And you're just like, that lands with me, I know what you're saying. But why I love it is like, it's great prose, but wrapped within it is appreciation of the cinematography, description of what's happening in the plot. And we get a nod to some of, Isabella Rossellini is in it. And we just get I think she just captured the mood of the film so well. And honestly, with this review, maybe you'll feel differently when you read it. When I want to revisit that film, which was one of my favorite films of the year, when it came out, I just read the review again because it captures the mood of it so beautifully. And I feel the same about this closing paragraph, which I do with a lot of Jessica's closing lines, where it feels like a fade to black, where I'm just like, I feel like you're leaving me to sit with this film's imagery and your closing feeling about that film. And that's why I always go on and on about closing lines, because like I want you to have that same feeling of a review landing as I do a film landing. And when you get that feeling when you fade to black, that's what I'm after. Maybe it's a lot to ask. But that's what I'm after. So have a read of that and see how you feel. But yeah, I think she captures the kind of like weird, mystical, sepulchral feeling of that film. There's another line in it I'm going to read to you. And it's again this like no description of like admitting that it's difficult to kind of truly capture it within words. No description of what happens in La Chimera can accurately convey what happens in La Chimera, which feels like watching an occurrence of ancient magic from the point of view of the spell. And like this review has had such a long life because it like was published at Cannes and then it went in the magazine, and I don't know how many times it was shared on social media with that point of view of the spell line over and over again. But I think that's the pleasure of great prose, when it's good enough, when the analysis is good enough and the prose have it there to match, it has this long life, and it is one of these things I could pick out in the archive in 20 years and be proud that we published it. But that again is like taking that hit of like, I'm not going to have this within a day of it screening at Cannes. I don't care. I'll have it. And I think that in this case, I can't remember how long, but it was a long time.
It was after the festival.
It was after the festival finished, which is, you won't get that with any other outlet. But yeah, that's why we did it.
Cool. I think now is a good time to open.
Can I talk about
sorry,
my
you can
one?
talk about yours. Sorry.
I feel bad about it.
Which I admit is probably less exciting than some of the lovely prose, but I think it's a real. So it's a review by Kim Newman, who is a real pro and has been writing for us since the 80s, if not earlier. And it's a review of A Hard Day's Night. So it's one of the reviews that I talked about, which is many people that are reading this will have seen the film. I love the first line, which I think is very simple, but manages to tell you a lot about the film. From that first chord, A Hard Day's Night is exhilarating and terrifying. And, you know, even within that, just saying from the first chord, you're giving a clue that it's a musical film, even if you've never heard of it before. The word exhilarating, which I would say is probably overused a bit. I've written a feature in the issue, this issue that's coming out next, and that got removed because it was already in the first line of a different feature.
Yeah.
So
although it is the line, it's the word that Kubrick used as a kind of marker of, you know, whether a film for him is art or not. Does it, you know, could you describe it as exhilarating? Does it give you that feeling? And I always.
Well, there you go. I feel better about using that word. Then.
Yeah.
And exhilarating. If you've seen the film, you appreciate why he's saying that, because it's so full of energy. These sort of young guys running around, and then the terrifying is a very unusual word to use, and that sets you up to sort of read and go, okay, why is he saying that? How is he going to justify using a sort of word that's mainly used for horror about a jukebox musical? Apart from that, he does all the basics so brilliantly. He tells you what happens in the film, gives you the context around not only the Fab Four but the director Richard Lester, and gives you sort of potted history, which is quite important for DVD reviews because you're reviewing the film but also the extras. So quite often people will take a quote from a director, from a commentary or things like that, weave it into their review, which is quite a smart thing to do. What I also love is in the first paragraph, he talks more about, if anyone's seen the film recently, there's a sort of Irish grandfather of one of the boys in the Beatles who comes along with them on their sort of madcap tour, running away from all their fans. And he focuses on him as the most interesting character over explaining who the Beatles are, because he's assuming quite rightly that most people reading this will know who they are. Yeah, And I think he's very relaxed on knowing what details you need to know and what you don't. He doesn't tell you, like you were talking about, a paragraph of summary. You could very easily do that with this film and say, they go and sing a song here, then they go and do a show and they sing a song here, and then they're on a train and they sing a song there. It's not going to be the most interesting thing to read, although it will give you a very accurate summary of what the film is. You can do that in fewer words without saying the specific geographical location of where the band are. So yeah, maybe less lyrical than some of the other pieces of writing that we've chosen, but I think if we had a magazine full of writing like this, each issue would be very happy because it so expertly tells you what the film is about.
And now we will go to questions.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up all the time. The first thing I do is make sure I've seen the film because you know I try to see as much as I humanly possible. But if I have a really differing opinion from a reviewer, especially not if it's positive really, because it's like if they have a differing opinion, that's one thing. I might double check things factually with other people who have seen it. If it's a real pan and I've not seen it. And I'm hearing like very different things, I might watch it myself and just try and make sure there's accuracy and it's fairly argued. But somebody happening like it happens every single issue. There are films that I am like rooting for and I love, and I'll have seen them at a festival and they come out and it gets ripped to shreds, and like that's the job. And that I respect my writer's opinion, and I have we have some people who are new to us. We have some people who've been writing for us for 50 years. I think of it as a collaboration, like I say. It's fine. It's fine. It's we don't. That's why we have that. I think it's we're kind of unique in that way that we have. I try not to. I mean, it does happen because there are festival reviews in the magazine. I try not to have the same writer on 2 reviews. It does happen. I definitely try not to have them on 3 reviews. So I try to have as many different voices in the magazine as I can. So of course they're going to differ to mine, and it's not my role as an editor to tell them what to think. But yeah, it does happen when a film I'm rooting for gets ripped to shreds, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. For my pages, it's much rarer an occurrence. If a film has been restored and being re-released on a sort of home, it tends to be a good film or a well-regarded one. Lots of people pitch to me having seen the films already and they know they want to write about it. It's almost like a relief to me if someone doesn't like a film that they're reviewing, because it's like, oh, this is something a bit different. Yeah. You'll find it more often with someone who's a real expert in a field and they know the whole genre like the back of their hand. They know this is a less significant one. But I think judging people's opinions is not necessarily our job. Yeah. Like you said, you don't want a pan, but that's more, if a pan happens, it's fine, but that's more in terms of the commissioning stage, is you don't want to set a film up for failure necessarily.
Yeah, like if someone says to me, I hate this director, I have a terrible relationship with this film, I've seen it and I want to do this, I'm like, well, no. Like I prefer people to go in blind and then we'll see. But I don't we definitely never commission for that sort of clickbait, rage baity response. It's just not something we do. But of course, negative reviews happen all the time. So it's just collaboration with the writer.
I think in terms of your own personal voice, there are lots of different publications that want that or don't. Something like Little White Lies, that's very much their house style. From my point of view as a sort of outsider, is they very much like their writers coming in with their own personality and talking in the first person and things like that. If you're writing for a trade like magazine like Screen or Variety, it's very much more, can you please get across the nuts and bolts of the film? Will a general audience like it? That kind of thing. To a later or a lesser or greater extent. If you're writing for yourself, I think you absolutely should feel able to firstly say any opinion of yours that you want to, and secondly put as much of your personality in, and that can be relating the film to your own personal life or trying to find those sort of interesting connections between one film and another that anyone else might not have. Everyone's brain works in different ways and sees film as such a visual medium, and it connects with you in quite an instinctive way that you'll see a shot in a film and it will remind you of something that no one else in the world would think of, and I think that should be seen as a strength.
Yeah. I think one thing that might be helpful is if you sometimes if you actually just get away from the written word to start with and maybe just record yourself talking about the film, and that will be much more of a direct sort of pipeline to your brain, I think. Sometimes when you start writing, you're a bit like, oh, well, I want it to be like this, or and you get scared about writing something, whereas maybe if you do that process first and then you're like, okay, I've kind of got that off my chest. And when I interviewed Laura Mulvey recently, one of the things that sort of she said about one of her tips to writers was to actually spend a lot of time thinking, and don't worry about writing, and almost like go out and walk and think about a film in a different place. Maybe talk about it with somebody else, and because I think there might be this sort of sense, particularly with people writing reviews really quickly online, that these thoughts just come to your head, instantly, and actually it takes some time to think through certain scenes, maybe think about particular scenes in a film and why you didn't like it or why you did, and try and break the film down in that way.
And it sounds counterintuitive, and you know this already, but just like read really widely, and like don't follow one critic that you really like their work, because it, like, especially if they're reviewing a film you're thinking about writing out yourself, it's really hard for that to cloud your thoughts, and like go and read widely beyond film. Like, I just filed a feature for Isabel, and like the film I watched made me think of Laurie Moore's work a lot, and so I should have been sitting writing the feature, but then I went and read a load of Laurie Moore, because it just helps spark ideas. So yeah, it's obvious advice, but it always works to read widely.
We love print, and I should say it's Mike Williams, who's the editor-in-chief in Sight and Sound, who couldn't be here tonight. He also loves print.
Yeah, he's always worked in magazines, and
Yeah,
that's the
with
real
print.
thing. I mean, it's very, very expensive to print.
Yeah, and the costs have gone up a
So,
lot.
I think we sympathise with all magazines that have had to go digital, and I'm sure, and I do think it's a case of having to go. I don't think it's a sort of
It's
active
never really
choice.
a choice, I don't think.
But no, there's definitely no plan for the magazine to stop, from our point of view, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and also like in this space, I think the BFI really values print and being able to be able to hold things, and we have the Film on Film Festival here, and
Yeah, I think nearly every writer will have a completely different approach, and often you're in awe of other writers for their approach, because particularly like the festival reviewers, who some of them can turn around amazing prose within an hour of seeing the film, and there's no drafting going on there. It's literally bang it out, file it, off to see another film. I don't think, I'm certainly not like that. It can take, to write reviews, I'll leave a day for it to kind of properly kind of hammer it into shape. I don't really deal with like first drafts and second drafts so much as sort of tweaking and refining as it's going along. But that may be different for everyone else. I can't like to kind of edit it as it goes along, really, because I feel like if I haven't got the first paragraph right, then I can't proceed to the second paragraph, because I feel like it's just got off to a crummy start, and so how can I proceed? It's just going badly at that point, so I need to...
because in your head you know that is going to have to change.
Yeah.
And when that's changed, is the second paragraph when to work with what it's changed to.
Yeah, and I think some people will get down 3,000 words for a 1,000-word piece and then whittle it down, whereas I'm more like, I don't want to write any more than I need to, so so we'll just try and write it exactly to that, and then tweak it and finesse that. I don't know what everyone else is.
I will often plan out the sort of things I want to make sure I have included, so that I don't get carried away and then go, oh no, I've run out of words and I still haven't written about this thing. Yeah, but I don't think, for me, it's definitely not a plan of I need to make sure I've written about the synopsis, the director, the composer, blah, blah, blah. It's more independent to each film. What is this film making me want to write about?
Yeah, I'm a real first paragraph sort of agonizer. Like I definitely do that, and like I'll think like, God, I've worked so hard today, and I'm like, oh, there's only 100 words here. But I have a lot of sympathy for writers who go over word count, because I'm a chronic overwriter myself, and then I kind of strip it back, and I I'm like an over researcher as well, and I hate that about what I do when I write. Never read other people's reviews. Like that's like a rule for everyone. Never read other people's reviews, but I will. Like I reviewed the Testament of Anne Lee recently. And I was like going deep, looking at Shaker pamphlets from like 1888. I'm like, gotta read all of this and make sure I get it in my head. And then I'll sort of like do all this research and kind of cast it aside, and then just write what I feel like. I think it would be a lot less stressful if you just write what you feel immediately, which is like what a lot of the trades writers do, and their work is fantastic. But I think maybe because I edit the section, I get kind of like almost like shell-shocked, but like, oh God, I read so much great writing every single day, and then I'm like, I've got to do the best I can. But yeah, I overwrite and strip back, and the first paragraph is always the first thing that I craft. But yeah, time-consuming when I do it.
Yeah, it's the same. I think the first paragraph is the one that takes so much time, but often, and some advice that I was given by someone very wise was like, when I was editing something, they were like, the first paragraph is often the writer clearing their throat, and look at, a bad review, you can just cross it out and actually start on the second paragraph. Whereas if that first paragraph is really integral to everything, then it stays. And that's, something that I've always, ever since then been like, ooh, I don't want to look back on my past reviews because they could just be chucked out.
And then Letterboxd. I used Letterboxd before I was sort of professional. I think it's really excellent for, from my point of view, it's like a way of practicing writing. And I never really used it for the social aspects, which I know is important for some people. But yeah, I think it's great. I don't know if anyone else has. I don't know if any of you have used Letterboxd at all.
I look at it a lot, but I don't have an account myself. Yeah.
I think there's some great writing on there. I think there's some great writing that hasn't been edited, and you can sort of tell. But I think it exists as a place that's a lot more personal than reading a magazine necessarily. And I think you can have some great sort of encounters with writers who you get to know through their writing.
Richard Brody was just saying, I don't know if anyone read that in defense of the traditional review piece that he wrote in the New Yorker recently, but like, and I think it's very true, it's like criticism is in trouble, but it's also in some ways never been better, because like everybody has access to archive materials now, and like the people can make really eloquent references very easy, because very young critics have access to more cinema than ever before, and so you can do great analysis if you're willing to do sort of the work and dig deep, and you can educate yourself quite quickly as a young critic. So,
and just to pick up on something Katie said about not reading other critics' reviews, Jonathan Rosenbaum, who we were talking about earlier for the Jeanne Dielman review, actually thinks the complete opposite, that you should, like, why wouldn't you? It's like you're just accumulating knowledge about a film to kind of spark your own brain cells, not in a sort of plagiaristic way, but just more in a way of sort of getting your, firing your synapses.
I think maybe I'm just a lot more insecure than Jonathan Rosenbaum.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am. But I would, I should sort of rephrase that. Like, I wouldn't say don't read them. I would say wait till you're almost finished and then read, because sometimes it's like, it's interesting if you've had a really, really positive review to something everyone else has negatively, has panned, and that's worth incorporating into the review, I think. So yeah, I would say don't read at all, but like wait till you're sort of close to the end. Yeah.
I think I can. Yeah, I think as you said, like when I watch a film with my son, I do try and like watch it a bit more through his eyes. And yeah, when you're like, say the Jurassic Park film last year, I'm just watching that and thinking, oh my God. But then I sort of looked at him and he was like, I was like, oh wow, this is amazing. Like, come on, Isabel, get with it. So I try.
Yeah, no, I think I'm the same. I think if I was watching Happy Gilmore 2 on Netflix, I'm very aware that it's not the kind of film that I need to necessarily be critical about. I think it's a lot easier for me if it's a comedy or something that taps into something less analytical in my brain. But then a lot of the watching I do outside of work, I think, is sort of partly for work. It's a new film that I feel like I should have seen because of the sort of work we do and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think because we have a limited capacity for what we can review, although we do cover a lot online that doesn't go in the magazine, a lot of online-only reviews. If I watch something like Happy Gilmore 2, I'd be like, maybe we should have reviewed it. Maybe I should have put this writer on it. Like, maybe that was an oversight. So in that sense, I like, just on a purely like production point of view, I'm always like, oh, I should have done it. Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot of programmers who also kind of are critics too. I mean, yeah, there's some kind of difficult lines, aren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more from the filmmakers' side themselves, whether, you know, they feel happy.
Yeah,
so often, like, we'll use filmmakers to do an interview with somebody else sometimes where we think that they're going to be able to give some extra insight, and they feel maybe happier in that role than reviewing something, or they're kind of more bringing to, like we have filmmakers who contribute to like a lost and found column, that sort of thing.
If it's a sort of like an enthusiastic assessment, they might feel more comfortable with that. We definitely have had filmmakers write for the section. More archive, I would say. But
I mean, there's people like Tarantino out there who aren't scared. They'll let
rip.
You know.
But we've also had a few critics who've like gone on to make films, and like I mean, it does seem to be the norm that once they enter the film industry and they've put work out there, they tend not to write like reviews of new releases. Like you've had like Paul Dwan write for your section, who did All You Need Is Death, the horror film, and he tends to go more archive purely because his like specialism is kind of Irish cinema, but like, you know, the Irish film industry is quite small, and like as soon as I approach him with a new theatrical release, he's like, oh, I know the producer, I know this person, I know that person, and it doesn't feel right anymore. So yes.
But I think you're right. Some people just don't have the sort of inhibition that lots of people do, where, like Tarantino, who will quite happily criticize his peers. I guess we have a similar issue with when you get people to review books. A lot of people will say, I can't review that book because I have some kind of relationship with the writer.
It is a smaller world, yeah. We didn't actually talk about books at all, but if any of you have read the magazine, it's like 2 pages within the magazine, and it tends to be like non-fiction, cinema-focused books, and I edit that section at the moment.
Yeah, but I love critics turned filmmakers. Kleber Mendonça Filho, great critic before his recent films.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, I love reading a review that really challenges my viewpoint and makes me see things in a film that I haven't seen. I suppose that's what I go to, like the greats, you know, great film reviewers for. So that's there. I mean, I think we're always, I think that's part of the sort of joy of a film magazine, and that you have the different sections that have different voices. And so you have the sort of feature section where, you know, you might have a feature that's maybe more objective, or there might be a review, say, that is more subjective. It's kind of, there's that mixture.
Yeah, I'm going to quote Richard Brody again, where he says, when I write a bad review, I'm not telling you not to go, I'm telling you not to enjoy it. And like, I kind of think we're the same. It's just like, we're just telling you to, you know, the writer is unpicking the ideas on screen, and like, it's, you know, it's not serviceable, like I said earlier. It's like, I mean, I guess you could argue the stuff that goes online only, that's coming out like a few days before release, there is an element of, is it bad or is it good in that? And that's maybe the kind of more like quick fire reviews that we do. But when it comes to the magazine, it's always this kind of slow pace, analytical sit with it. But I don't think we tend to do reviews with that kind of, like that dichotomy to it. That is good or is it bad focus,
But I think the sort of sense of what a critic, who a critic should be, you know, what criticism is for. Is it for championing films that will go under the spotlight, which I sort of think like Sight and Sound is there for too. And so it is that sort of hard balance of, you know, even if you can still champion a film and, you know, take some issues with it. So I think it's about just, you know, having that balance.
Yeah, and like our lead review is, it tends to be a film that we are championing, but championing doesn't always mean it's a glowing review. Like one of the ones on screen earlier was a Kate Stables review of Luna Carmoon's Horde, which is a film I like, and the film praises it as a very original debut, but also kind of takes issue with some of the more self-conscious references to like the tin drum and things that film does. And then the Q&A with Luna Carmoon, the first thing she says is, it's not a perfect film, I intended it to be that way. So you can critique things with love, I think.
And we should say that a lead review is the sort of the lead review, the first review in the section.
The 2-page review, and it's because I talked about the sort of 740 word reviews and the 420, but the lead review is like over 1,000 words, and that allows it tends to be a film that like it allows the reviewer to expand a bit further into either their back catalogue or like an online conversation around the film, or maybe political stuff that's happening around the film, and just like give more expansive view.
We should probably explain a little bit about, obviously, we're some members of the editorial team. There's Mike Williams as well. We have a sort of sub-editor and sort of designer who are freelance, but most of the writing in the magazine is from freelance writers who are commissioned, and then we also write too, and there's some various people around the BFI who also contribute. Yeah, do you want to talk about kind of
I
what
can.
you...
I think like we definitely are a publication that people come with like usually a lot of established bylines. Like so that it's pretty rare that we'd have somebody where we're their first I say about like their first published piece of work. That like it's very rare that would happen. Like usually they've gained some experience, they've been published at various places, and then they come to us. Just because we have this like quite rigorous editing process, it's quite hard for a new writer, you know, like if you're not used to being edited, getting several different people tell you what you need to change about your writing, it could be difficult if you've never been exposed to that before. But we do have people come to us through like the London Film Festival Young Critics Mentorship. We have people on placement with us from NFTS. And then like when they're in the team and they kind of get used to working with us, like then they might get to write a review for the first time, and that's a kind of different thing. Even though they might not have a back catalogue of published work, they've kind of gained experience from working with us. I have people that have worked, as I said, worked with Sight and Sound for like 50 years. People who've worked with us for the last few months. And I do seek out critics like that, and I keep an eye on people. I read widely beyond Sight and Sound to try and spot people that I think might fit well with us. So I approach people sometimes, and I sometimes do get cold pitches. And the thing that kind of stands out to me the most is like, because obviously most theatrical releases, I'm going to have a plan for them, or I'm going to have them reviewed at a festival, and I'll probably have a writer in mind. You know, if it's like an emerging French film that was big at Cannes, I'll probably assign someone like Catherine Wheatley. If it's like a horror, I might have someone like Kim Newman in mind. But occasionally I get these pitches be like ICA off circuit, you know, where they do like a little, you know, short-term theatrical releases for often undistributed films. And sometimes I get cold pitches from people like, I have this relationship with this film, I think this is why you should cover it, and maybe, you know, hopefully it'd be on my radar, but sometimes it's not. And if they have writing that I can sort of read through and get a sense of their voice, then sometimes that has led commissions. So that it's, championing like smaller films or having an interesting thing to pitch about a smaller film that might not have distribution yet, that can be an interesting way in. Or just sending like a pitch about, you know, it might be a theatrical release that's coming out in like 4 months' time. Because I tend to work like 3 months ahead-ish, but sometimes further. For really big releases, but so like the Film Distribution Association website is how I track what's coming out, and it's really reliable. So it's a good place for new freelancers to kind of look at what's way in the future and maybe craft a pitch around that. I don't get that many pitches for reviews, to be honest. I wish I did. So.
Yeah, we get a lot of pitches for features, and I suppose the one thing I would say is that 99% of them don't really work for us because sometimes the prescriptive writer doesn't really know the magazine. Sometimes they haven't looked at the latest issue and seen what they're pitching is already in there. You know, they haven't really thought deeply about like, is this the kind of thing that we publish? Oh, it's my thesis. You know, of course you want to publish this, or I've already written this article. Will you publish it?
Never do that.
And that's never
send an article in.
That's not really how we work. So I think having that really deep understanding of the publication first of all, and also, you know, trying to keep it short. Think, you know, how many emails is this person reading a day? Like, you need to get it in that maybe 2 paragraphs max, but pretty short ones, tight ones. And then, obviously link out at the bottom to other things that you've written and think, you know, okay, so the problem, they might click on one. So what's the top one that I'm going to put there is the one that I'm most proud of, or the one that's, you know, the most prestigious sort of outlet. That's it in a nutshell.
That's interesting because a lot of our writers are from an academic background, I think, but people want people to write academically, which is quite a difficult skill, especially if it's your day job is to write for academic journals. It's a very different kind of writing, even though you're writing all the time. That's a really interesting question. I don't think many people do write about film theory in their writing in Sight and Sound. I think obviously, you know, we had an interview with Laura Mulvey, and she's a very prominent figure and has this sort of things like the male gaze, which have sort of transcended film theory. I think the issue tends to be the word count, is that if you start getting into a piece of film theory, there's all of this groundwork you have to build up in what is this, how does it relate to the film, and that can sort of wipe out a review. I think that's probably the reason that people tend to steer clear of it.
Yeah, I think it's probably more likely to appear, I guess, in maybe the book review section if you're reviewing something, or in the features section, in an
where
essay,
there's
where
more
there's more
word
space
count.
too. And I guess we would always come at it from the angle of, like, you have to be able, someone who hasn't read the theory needs to be able to understand this. And Laura Mulvey's a great person for, her writing is so accessible, like you can read it without, having read Freud necessarily. And so I suppose that's the sort of line that we look to take with it. Yeah, good question though. I think we probably have to wrap up there.
We should all thank the whole Silent Sound.
Thank you for coming.